Okay, I can. I think you can start now.
Okay. So you can hear me fine?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So do you plan to do a kickoff first? Or I just go into my slide?
So for all attendees, if you want to interact, just raise your hand and we will give you access to talk. Sure, you can write in chat. You are muted. You are muted, Mr. Joseph. We can't hear you. Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Let's see. So you can see my slide, right?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Okay, good. So good evening, everyone. I'm Joseph Wei. I'm giving this presentation from Sun California, so it's very early. It's about 8 a.m. in my time. So, and I'm really happy to be here to give this presentation to all of you. So the topic is how to perfect a pitch. So a little bit of my background. I've been in the industry for over 35 years. And I have been worked for some of the biggest corporations in the world, all related to computers. So HP, everybody knows, is one of the largest computer companies in the world. And then another very large company called NEC Corporation from Japan. And also Inventec, which is not a very well-known company, but based out in Taiwan. But the company manufactured for a lot of very famous company, like the Apple speakers that you use today, and also the Apple earplug, and also they manufacture for HP, Dell, and other companies' computer product. And I also have experience running a startup accelerator. And it's called Lab 360. And then I also joined a couple of the other startup accelerators, like the European Innovation Academy, the Alchemist Accelerator, and Women's Startup Lab, and 10X Innovation Lab. And these are all US-based startup accelerators as the mentor. So over the years, I've met with over 1,500 startups, and I've mentored over 200 startup founders. And how I got invited to this event is through one of my colleagues from IEEE, which I'm a senior member, and also the vice chair for partnership for the IEEE entrepreneurship program. And I'm also a graduate of Tufts University with an electrical engineering degree. So a little bit about my journey to Silicon Valley, because I've been invited to speak about startup, venture invest. I'm actually not from Silicon Valley. I spent about 20 years from high school to college to working for this computer company called Digital Equipment Corporation. And it's located in the 128 highway, which we had at the time many different high-tech companies. And I moved out to the San Francisco Bay Area, or as we call Silicon Valley, in 1996. And I was in charge of the NEC's PCs and server products. And then I moved on to another computer company called SGI, or Silicon Graphics, which build workstations and servers for rendering a lot of the movies that you know. It's like Jurassic Park, Star Wars, and Lord of the Rings. And then I joined a manufacturing company called Inventec, headquartered in Taiwan. And I formed my own management consulting company, Technology Ventures Group. I focus on helping startups and also for company to get involved with the startup ecosystems. So one of the results is I co-founded a venture fund called Heuristic Capital, which basically took over a lot of the investment of startup in Lab 360. And Lab 360 is an accelerator in Silicon Valley, helping startup focusing on wearable and IoT products. So the target audience for this talk that I designed this presentation for, startup founders, aspiring entrepreneurs, students and graduate students, and also anyone who's new to pitching for supporting the ideas. So I'll go right into my main presentation. So what is the pitch? So let's take a look at the kind of a general definition. Pitching is an opportunity to introduce your idea to gain support or acceptance by individuals, groups, or organizations. So as you probably are very familiar with this picture, and some of you might be doing the pitching after this event. So before you pitch, you actually do some preparation work. Here are some of the facts to consider. Who are your audience? So that's why I start with my presentation to define the audience that this presentation is for. What is the format? So there are all kinds of pitching events. They all have different formats. How is it delivered? So with the pandemic now, we are used to doing a lot of these virtually online. Hopefully soon we'll get back to some of those in person. And sometimes it's a small group, which is more intimate. You can be more personal in how you deliver the presentation or pitching. And sometimes you could be in front of a crowd of 1,000 people or more. So for example, TechCrunch, a conference for startup to pitch, and usually it was held in San Francisco and attended by thousands of people. So they had whole pitch competition. and the person pitching will be in front of over 1,000 people, which is a little difficult to be more personal when you're delivering to such a large group. Time limit. So you have to pay attention to how much time. And I will go into the reason why later on. And also, most important thing is when you are the person pitching, what do you expect the end result from the pitch? So going over a little bit about the types of pitch. So we always talk about this 30-second elevator pitch. So the example is if you are on the elevator going up a high-rise building with an investor or a very important customer, and you literally have about 15-30 seconds to introduce yourself and your idea. So how can you come across with the very succinct, concise message and be able to impress this person? In the United States, there's also often the opportunity for a 2-minute pitch, but usually no slides. It's just open mic. They call open mic event. 1 to 2 minutes to talk about your company, your idea, and why should people get in touch with you after your pitch. Then there's the common 3 to 7 minute pitch, which is very common in hackathons, demo days, and startup competitions. And the format can be very open. You can just straightly talk without slides, or you can include slides, which can include videos. And then there's the 20-minute, well, it's not really 20-minute. It's an hour meeting with a VC, but usually your pitch deck is about 20 minutes. And I'll explain a little bit later of an example why it is made famous by one of the early seed stage investment venture firm called Garage Tech, founded by Guy Kawasaki, whose full-time role at one point is the evangelist for Apple. So usually the short pitches is to gain a commitment to a longer meeting with whoever your intended audience. So you don't have to tell every detail in that meeting, but sufficient to get the person interested to say, come back and we spend more time. Okay, the main pitch is about an hour meeting. Unless it's a due diligence meeting by a VC firm. And sometimes it can take over multiple meetings or one meeting that can go for 2 hours or longer. There's no right or wrong format. There are tools called slide beans, but typically PowerPoint is still the most common form of sharing the presentations. So in the slide, and I'll explain why you don't have to include every bit of detail afterwards, but it's really highlights of the talking points. So it's preferred that sometimes you use chart and images over words because human perception is much more intuitive with visual than for text. And because you have 1 hour, it will go by very quickly. So be ready to have a backup slides in the back of your main presentation. So you don't have to go search your computer and look for a certain type of files and open it up because time with venture capitalists is usually they are booked very tight every day. And also, why 20 minutes of talk? Because sometimes it goes longer with Q&A, and also you want to leave at least 5 or 10 minutes for the next step discussion, assuming the audience is interested to have a follow-up meeting. Or this is also a time for you to convince the people in the room that they want to spend more time to learn about your company or your idea. Because usually the decision of investing in a startup takes multiple meetings. Okay, the most famous person everybody know around the world who's the best pitch person is Steve Jobs from Apple. Very simple slide. That's all he uses most of the time. And when he was the person who kicked off the Apple new product launches. The secret to memorable pitch is practice, practice, practice. Right. A lot of speakers, like TED Talk speakers, when you saw the recording, everything was so smooth and concise and eloquent. Oftentimes, it's many hours of practicing of the same talk by the speaker to get to that point. So no one can, well, I would say no one can, but very few people can deliver a very succinct pitch on the first time without any hiccups. Okay. So a lot of my advice here or tips here, it's really for startup. However, for college students, when they make project presentation, they can adapt a lot of the same concept. Let's talk a little bit about the stages of startup and the funding. Because the type of pitch, and the content are very related to the stage of your startup. Usually before Series A, which is a very formal and a larger round of funding, there are a couple types of funding before that happens. The pre-seed round, which matches to the validation phase, usually it's less than $1 million, right? And the type of investors are usually friends and family, angels, and accelerators. And usually it's in the form of a convertible note. For seed level, it's really matching up to the previous slide called the prototype stage. So the funding is around $1 to $3 million. It really depends. So software startups sometimes require much less capital at the beginning And then later on, when you launch, you need more money, mainly to spend on scaling your customer. While if you're building medical device or something that is require a lot more R&D work, like space rocket, then your seed prototype funding will be a lot higher. So this is general guideline. And it's very similar to the pre-seed, friends and family, angels, and accelerators. Again, usually it's a convertible note. Then when you have at that point, you have beyond the prototype, you should have the what we call MVP or minimal viable product. And the round usually is $5 million or more. And that is to scale from the initial customer to a much larger size customer. Usually you still focus on domestically. And also increase in key increase in key hirings. So you can scale your company resources as well. And this is a price run. That means you'll fix the valuation, and usually it's about 20% for whatever amount of money that you raise. So at the idea stage, the pitch is really about storytelling. So how did you come up with the idea? If you have co-founders, and usually it's highly recommended to have a co-founder. This is extremely difficult for a single founder to make a lot of progress just by himself or herself. So how did the founders meet? Why did they agree to join force to do this start? And why do they want to commit? Well, it's not really the entire life, but at least for the next 5, maybe up to 10 years, to make this idea into a reality, a company, really a successful company. And then what are the basic risks that the co-founders has taken? And also another important thing is the founders or the founders a good communicator? Because when you have 2 people working together, it's very simple to communicate one-on-one. But as your company scale in the number of employees, then good communication is extremely important. And also another aspect of communication is not just being able to communicate clearly, is to communicate with confidence to demonstrate the leadership capability of the founders. And that's very important when you are hiring the key members to join your team, because they have to believe also your vision for your idea that is going to be someday a very big and successful company. So in the validation stage, you need some validation. It cannot be just an idea. So what have you done to validate the idea? So typically is to go to potential user or customer and get their feedback. Whether it's software, hardware, how do they like it? Did that idea or the product or service or software solve some of the problems that it's target for? What other improvement that you get from the user feedback? And then you want to find out how much time and money to get to the prototype or the MVP stage. And that's how you put into your pitch deck to justify the money that you need to raise for that stage. And also, what things that you don't know yet, because it's still early on. And sometimes even company has to actually launch the product with the ad into the market to be able to collect sufficient validation to help them to hone in and target the really suitable market to go after. And then the next stage is the prototype and launch stage. Then it's all about planning and execution. What are the resources, milestones? What are the detailed plans of the user fund? And then at the growth and maturity stage, it's again all about planning and execution. Especially when the company is successful and go IPO. So in the United States, a company has to do quarterly reporting. And the stock valuation usually is measured or correspond to the company's financial performance. And what are the additional resources to achieve the milestones defined? So if you need to raise more money, so sometimes that's where Series B, Series C funding come in, is to usually use the funding for international expansion. So let's talk a little bit about a perfect pitch. So a perfect pitch is a moving target, because a perfect pitch should be continuously improved based on the feedback you receive and the company's progress. So there is no perfect pitch. You can use for a very long period of time when you're in the early, especially you start as an early age startup. But there are some general guidelines, and I'll share with you one example. The thing is about the pitch is to make it memorable. So you need to know the audience and tailor the content. Sincere and confident. Be enthusiastic. It's a very careful balance, not to sound too arrogant that sometimes overselling your pitch actually would cost credibility of your pitch. And show passion. So be emotional show emotion when you talk about some of the key points of your presentation. And also leave pauses. So there will be sometime for the investors to think about what you just said and then come up with a question. If you just flow through this really quickly, sometimes you do not, there'll be a lack of opportunity for the interactions, such as allow the audience to ask questions. So speaking of that, at this point, I forgot to start at the beginning. I think the format is I'll go through this presentation and then take Q&A after my presentation. So anytime you can use graphic images, even a short video instead of words, because visual effects are more memorable than text. And make sure you manage your time effectively. So you never want to run out of time before you get to the most important things that you want to discuss with the investor. So let's talk about one format that's pretty popular in the United States. So Guy Kawasaki 10, 20, 30 rule of PowerPoint. So he suggests 10 slides, 20 minutes of time, and use 30 fonts in the slides if you have to use text bullets. So what are in the 10 slides? They're supposed to cover these 10 points, which I'm not going to go into every single one of them, but you can read the. Now it's a guideline, 10 slides. If you need to expand to beyond 10 slides, that's fine. Usually, I think 15 is a good number. But if you go beyond 20, you might run out of their time, because in a 1 hour meeting with an investor, the ideal split of time is 20 minutes of you talking and 40 minutes of interactions and with the investor or taking their questions. And that includes about 5 or 10 minutes before the end of the meeting to discuss about potentially what are the next steps. So that's why one of the tips I shared earlier is when you develop pitch, you also have to define the objectives, what you want to achieve at the end of the pitch. Do you want the investor to invest, right? So, but again, I mentioned that investment doesn't come in just one meeting. It comes in multiple meetings. So what does it take and what's the expectation if the meeting goes well? Is that 1 week before the next meeting takes place, 1 month, or what? And who will be in the next meeting that you meet with? Especially if the VC is interested in investing, they will bring different people in their company with specific technical skills or market skills. Like for medical device, they have some specialists that need to understand US FDA. So it will be called a due diligence meeting, and that will require a lot more preparation for the startup team to follow up before that, to get ready before that follow-up meeting. So the reason why 10 slides is usually takes 1 to 2 minutes per slide. So if you pay attention to the flow that I have gone so far, it's about right. It's about 1 to 2 minutes per slide that I've been using so far. Because I don't have a lot of graphics so far, but later on I will use images that might speed up the time for each slide. And that you also want to include time for questions, and the time for discussion of next steps and follow up. Why 30 font size is because if you're in the room with a VC, which is typically a small conference room, it depends where the VC sits, but 30 fonts can be read pretty easily for anybody sitting 15 feet away. Also, if you have a good way to use the image or short video to convey the message, it is also preferred over the text. Yeah. So doesn't matter it's 30 fonts or bigger fonts, visual is always preferred. So one of the things now talking about knowing your audience, I'll share with you a little bit from the investor perspective. When investors sit in the room, this is what they think about the startup when the startup founders pitch to them. They take about 5 to 6 meetings a day. Most of the time, they cannot remember even the name of the presenter of the first startup when they went through the last startup. So that's why it's very important to make your pitch to be memorable, right? So they will remember, is that startup to talk about the idea I want to find out more. So even though the product spec, market size, and other details are important, but don't over emphasize on them because the VCs usually can't remember all of them. They just need to remember, they need to, you have a very good idea, your presentation is very concise and clear, and they want to learn more. Another thing from the investor perspective during the meeting is to evaluate the founder's chemistry. So in early stage startup, it's very important that the founder has good working relationships. Because sometimes when you have two co-founders in a startup, one decides to quit, the other co-founder might not be able to pick up the slack to continue to run the startup. The next point, trustworthiness. That is a very difficult thing to be able to gauge in just one meeting. So a lot has to do with the personality and the style and how the person who pitched to the investors react to some of the questions to develop some level, first level of worthiness. And the last part is also very difficult because at the early stage, you don't really have execution experience to of your startup to share. So it's really about the past experience of the founders to boost their credibility. US VCs are very keen on that the idea is address a very large market and the potential return on investment. And also the next thing is they have to understand their own company's expertise because it takes many rounds of funding to take to an exit event of a startup. So does the VC firm have obviously funding to follow through the different round, but also the expertise to help introduce other investors, customers, key partners to the startup to help the startup to scale. The expectation for startup. I'll go a little bit about more background about that from the investor side to help the startup founders to understand the process. So most of the time you hear a lot of no's. It's not the right time to invest. And I'll explain why in the follow-up few slides. and also to find refer to a VC by a trusted friend of the VC is the most time effective. There are some write-ups about startup founders who are very persistent, and after 5, sometimes maybe even over 10 emails, they finally got a meeting with a VC. And VCs, a lot of times, they have what they call a trusted network. So they refer good deals to each other, because a lot of times the one VC firm does not want to take up all the risk and fund the entire round by itself. So they have what they call syndicate investment partners they bring in. So that is the best way to get a meeting with a VC, is through what they call warm introduction. And in the big VC firm with multiple partners, so each partner might focus on a different market or technologies or industry. So you also have to research to learn about the company, the startup, the venture capitalist company, and also the individual general partner that you're going to meet to give you a high chance of receiving funding. So this is the typical deal flow. It varies 1 to 2,000 pitches depending on the size of the venture capital company. So they start with scheduling 1,000 pitches, review 500, and then select 40 for the due diligence. And at the end, so sometimes they got turned down by the startups when they get multiple offers. So out of 1,000 pitches, 1 to 2 startups will get funding. So you reverse that logic, then so you have to pitch a lot for funding to get funding. That's why I usually recommend to find warm introduction to move through this process a little more efficiently. So here are the many different funding sources, but I always start with the founder's own money. And then friends and family, angels, crowdfunding. So don't forget grants. Many countries have government grants. They are basically free money, mostly depending on that you are developing some core IP, intellectual properties, with milestone, and that's how the grants are awarded. And also look for grants from foundations, especially if you're doing social impact type of startup. Service providers. Some of the legal firms will extend credit terms to help finance your patent filings. Manufacturers, some of the big manufacturing companies, they also invest in the customers. So also a favorable payment term will also help extend the financial burden of a startup. Incubator, accelerators, but not all of them do investments, so you have to check them out. And then last is the typical VCs, corporate ventures, private equity companies. And when you have revenue, then you can also have opportunity to work with banks or alternative financing, basically based on PO and loans and other type of non-equity related type of funding. So here are a list of startup pitch resources. I won't go over all of them, but I think this slide deck will be available afterwards. And you are welcome to check out all these links. So some of the things to avoid during pitching to a VC. Don't go in there and ask the VC hey, what do you invest in? So don't be surprised. Sometimes usually inexperienced first-time entrepreneurs will make this type of mistakes. And it's really up to the startup founders to research the venture capitalist company and the specific partner's background before the meeting takes place. It's not to learn about them during your meeting with the VC. And you have to sound positive and upbeat because it's your idea. So there's a fine line between being extremely positive and dedicated to your idea to being arrogant. That's why I mentioned earlier is that be enthusiastic, but balance it so that you don't sound like you are really arrogant that you know everything. Yeah, there will be some very critical questions coming from the VCs. Basically, they want to find every way that you will fail with your idea to make sure that you have thought through all the scenarios and have a plan to address them if that scenario comes alive. And also know your story and know what you want before you go into these meetings. Haven't been an engineer by training early on in my career. I understand that if the founders are from engineering background, they will often jump into, hey, I can build a better mousetrap, without knowing what is already out there already. So make sure you do some early market investigation of potential competitors. There's no, today, is a startup that can come in and say they have no competitors. That means the startup haven't done their research. And if you don't know your competitors, sometimes it's difficult to really convince your VCs to the pros and cons of your idea versus your competitors. So it's better to talk about the advantages of your idea or your product or your service than to really bad-mouthing your competitors. That is just to build your conversation with the VC to stay in a very positive way. Last part, but not the least, is to communicate very clearly. Answer a question with as direct as possible. And if you don't know the answer, don't answer by making it up. Just say, I don't know, I will get the answer to you after this meeting. So some final advice, be sincere. Investor mainly invest in people they trust. Be humble, and because there are incidences where founders got into arguments with VCs because the founders is so passionate. Sometimes they could be right, but on the other hand, nobody knows everything. Even if you are the founders of your company, because a lot of VCs, they came from the industries. They understand a lot of these things. that the founders have gone through. And then the other thing is follow up and follow through. Like I mentioned, there are write-ups in Quora and other type of Reddit about founders took him like more than 10 emails to follow up with the investor and finally got a meeting, or some even successful in getting funding. Ideally, if you go to a VC meeting, the person pitching should focus on the pitch. And there should be another person to write down any notes regarding the questions raised, the follow-up action items, so the presenter doesn't have to pause and waste their valuable time interacting with the VC, so they will have time to write down these notes. Like I said, the pitch deck is a continuous improvement product. So always incorporate new feedback to constantly improve your pitch deck. And make sure you have your contact information in the first and the last slide. I understand that some of you will have a 3-minute pitch coming up, and I'm going to give you some tips specific to the three-minute pitch. So average time per slide is 1 to 2 minutes. So 3 minutes goes by very quickly. Average person speak about 150, 180 words per minute. So it equates to about 20, 40 sentences in three minutes. So according, I forgot where I found this stat. So human brain can process 60,000 times faster than text. And 90% of the information transmitted to the brain is visual. So these are key things for you to consider when you are doing the 3-minute pitch. Focus on a few key points. Don't have to squeeze in like 10 bullets that are how great your product is, because people are going to forget. Just focus on a few key differentiation points. If you have statistics or quotes from your user, use those, because those are much more credible and memorable. And have fun. And smile, and try to be relaxed when you're giving the presentation. And then last but not, as I shown in another slide, rehearse. So you can make sure that you don't leave time of the 3 minutes, but you don't run out of the time before you get to the key points. So that's my presentation. I thank you for your time, and I'm open up for questions now. So are people putting into the chat or the Q&A?
You can use Q&A or chat, and if anyone have any questions, just raise your hand and we will give you access to it. Sarah is asking about presentation. Can you send us the presentation?
since we don't have questions and we have some time, maybe we can do this exercise. So everybody takes about a minute to write a 1-sentence self-introduction into the chat. Who you are and what you do. So it's about a minute. So if you're ready, you can just type it into the chat. So I start with my introduction. And contact information, just in case you guys want to send me an email. Okay. So there's a question. The question is regarding validation stage when getting feedback from customers. Do we have idea presented to the customer or sample product? Okay. Now it depends on the stage. If you are in the pre-seed, that means you just came up with the idea, you have done maybe some very preliminary prototyping, especially if you do software. It's very easy to create some sample codes. Even as simple as if you do a mobile app, make some sample screenshot. And that's good enough to meet with some of the potential customers. Now, if you really want what I call the user experience feedback, then you should have what I call as a sample product. So some codes that will, if you have mobile app, so some codes, some sample screen that people can click on to provide you with more feedback. Sample product usually is at the stage of launch. So for example, Kickstarter, which is a crowdfunding site. A lot of people will list their project to raise funding to produce the first product, but they will have a prototype that they will share with people. They said, this is what I built, but not to get it to the manufacturing stage, they need to raise some funding. I hope that answers your questions. Okay, another question came in. Is it good to have 2 or 3 members present the idea, or is it just one member? I think the one member, usually it's the CEO, presenter, but occasionally, if you dive into specific area, like very technical in the coding of certain type of things, if the CTO or the co-founder, engineering co-founder is there, then the CEO will call that person to help explain. But in terms of the main presenter, is ideally is just being one. So another question is, what's the best start in the presentation? Question, and I could not read the a quote. Is it QAUT? Now, in terms of the 10 slide, one of the things they recommend is to start out with the problem statement. What problem are you solving? So there's no right or wrong, but those 10 slides basically will cover most of the expectation or the questions that an investor would have, because you as a founder know everything from the early days to the time you pitch. I would say it's hard to gauge, actually. I shouldn't quote statistic. So the VC attending the meeting, ideally they should at least skim over your slide. But most of the time they will not have studied your slide. So a lot of the time is really when you go through the slides, that's when the first time they actually learn about the detail about how you come up with the idea and what your product does. Yeah. Yeah, let me go back to the slide. 10 questions. Here you go. /20/30, you will be able to also find a link to his website. So another question came in is, what is the best advice regarding finding the right co-founder? What can someone do if don't have the right co-founder? Do we have to stop until we get one, let's say a CTO to a tech idea, or do we in that case find a company to elaborate as a co-founder to move forward? Okay. So the challenge is actually, that's why I say having a single founder of a startup, because typically, well, let me go back. If you try to be an entrepreneur, I will recommend, if you're an engineer, take some business classes. You don't have to get a full MBA degree, right? And there are a lot of universities that offer specific classes of the business skill that you need to pick up. And vice versa. If your background is in business, finance, you can also take a few classes on the technical side to bring up your technical skill. So one of the most popular places to find a network for people with different skill set is a website called Angel List. ANGEL LIS ANGEL. I'll type in the chat. ANGELLIST.co. Let me double check to make sure that works. Let me stop sharing. Okay, there's 2 L's. Ooh, still didn't work. So this is the website, angel.co. Yeah. Now, if some of you are students in a university environment, especially a bigger university, they have a school of engineering, just school of business. You have a lot of activities. Join some of the activity from the students from another school and start networking, right? So it's not as much as the technical skill of a CTO that you need. It's also the compatibility if you want to invite that person as your co-founder. Remember, VC fund is a 10-year fund. The reason why 10 years in the United States is the average exit of a startup can be somewhere between 6 to 8 years. And like companies like Dropbox, actually it took them 13 years before they went IPO. So the co-founders basically have to work together for many, many years in order to be able to get to an exit event. And halfway through your journey, losing one the co-founder is a very challenging task for the remaining founder to get additional investors. So focus on not just on the technical capability of the CTA, but also the personal compatibility. So there are many design firms that if you have the funding, you can hire a design firm, and usually they will sign an NDA, so your idea is still protected, and they will help you to create wherever the first prototype or the MVP product or even the final product. So depending on what stage you are at. And quite frankly, many large corporations, Amazon, Google, maybe with the exception of Apple, that does a lot of their own design and everything. They don't outsource much out to outside companies. Many of these companies, consumer branded companies, they do use outside design company, industrial design, electrical design company to help them to build the products. The challenge usually for early stage startup is the funding. While I'm waiting for additional questions, another idea to share. Finding co-founders, a lot of co-founders, college roommates or friends. So come to mind is the Google founders, Larry and Sergey, right? Yahoo co-founders, David Filo and Jerry Yang. Now, the reason why a lot of times they are college friends, or sometimes even would be like co-workers from the same company for multiple years and left at the same time to co-found a company, because now the two co-founders have years of time to get to know each other, to trust each other to do a startup venture. Yes, absolutely. Ask the question. So somebody put in the chat that they want to ask a question about funding. Please go ahead and ask the question. Okay, the question is, if I'm looking to start a company, a not-for-profit, free for all in education sector, where customers don't have to pay, what is the best way to fund it in such a way the company moves forward and don't, I assume it's a typo, that don't have financial issues. I mentioned before, one of the sources of funding is grants. Now, a lot of government grants in the United States will have the grants from National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health. But all those grants are tied to some kind of a research work of developing some kind of intellectual, just use the term intellectual properties. So it could be a drug discovery, it could be a research in new kind of material for some kind of power or something. Now, family foundations is a good area to look at because everybody knows that now it's split. It used to be called the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but now Melinda has her own foundation. So some of these foundations actually will give out grants to help startup to focus on a particular problem. So you can start looking at the funding for from different, I would say, not the typical venture sources, such as family foundations. They are also, so I'm not familiar with the funding outside the United States. Most of my experience in the United States. For example, recently United States has passed the infrastructure fund, which is into billions of dollars. So counties and cities sometimes have a special program and that you can tap into for funding. So for example, I'll share with you in the city of San Jose has allocated funding to provide 50,000 families, each with a laptop and 1 year free broadband internet access, mainly for low-income families. So it's the providers of this laptop and service to the family actually are nonprofit companies that match the requirement of this fund. So also sometimes you think about a not-for-profit company, doesn't mean that they don't have to collect fees or for the service. Yeah, it's just nonprofit is measured not being a profit-driven as the main company goal. So Red Cross in the United States is a nonprofit, and there are many organizations like that. And I believe AARP is also, they charge a very small membership fee to cover some of the basic costs of the operations. So I hope that's helpful. So I think we are about to run out of time. Maybe one more question. So I just realized I was not sending my messages in chat to all the attendees. So I'll share my email address one more time with all of you. If you have a question to send to me afterward. Oops. Okay, sorry, still picked the wrong choice. So it was, I have a choice to send it just to the panelists. I didn't realize it was not sent to the attendees. So, Mohammed, we are set for this session. Okay, one more question. Okay, what is the best advice in your experience you could give for entrepreneurs to succeed? I think that this is a common theme that that people tend to be successful. They pick a problem that they personally has to solve for themselves. And it's also happen to be a problem that is fundable by the investment community. Because especially in the healthcare area, I've seen some of the startup founders, how they came up with the idea. Can't think of the details now. So there's a company acquired by Google called Smart Spoon. So Smart Spoon basically built a spoon with a smart sensor and a gyro built into the spoon to help people with Parkinson's disease to be able to feed themselves, because one of the problems with the people with Parkinson is their hands shake. So it's very difficult for them. And I recall the founder who came up with the idea was to build something to solve this problem for one of his family member who was suffering from this disease, Parkinson's disease. And his company was acquired by Google after I think he built the first prototype. So finally now the product, if you Google Smart Spoon, you will find that it's available in the market. So in a way, it speed up the product availability to the market. Oftentimes, it takes a startup much longer time to get their product to the market in a with a wide distribution. But I think the acquisition of Google really helped to get his product finished and now in the marketplace very quickly. Any other questions? Yeah, earlier I was told that the session will go to 7:30. But I think if you still have questions, you will think about question, I can stay on.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Joseph. Appreciating your efforts. Our
Thank
session
you.
has been ended here. And the next session, please check the chat and go to the Zoom link. The next session will start right now. And Mr. Joseph, about send you after the session, inshallah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So Welcome everyone to send me email afterwards if you have additional questions. And I enjoyed giving this session to all of you, and thank you for your attention.